Imagine this, a high-profile murder case. The police announce an arrest within 24 hours. The media celebrates, the public breathes a sigh of relief. And then, months later, the case completely falls apart in court. Key evidence is thrown out. Witnesses change their stories. The judge criticizes the investigation on the record. The suspect walks free, maybe guilty, maybe innocent, and the victim's family is left with nothing. When police get it wrong, cases don't just weaken, they can completely collapse. Sometimes it's deliberate misconduct. More often, it's avoidable errors, sloppy evidence handling, botched interrogations, tunnel vision, or cutting corners under pressure. In this video, we're going to break down the most common investigative mistakes that ruin cases, using real patterns from court decisions and documented wrongful convictions. By the end, you'll recognize the red flags in almost any big case you see on the news. Let's start with where many disasters begin: the crime scene. Before we go case by case, let's set the stage. Modern criminal investigations are supposed to follow strict procedures, secure the scene, preserve evidence, document everything, and keep an open mind about suspects. But in the real world, things are messy. Officers are exhausted, understaffed, and under intense public pressure to find answers fast. That's where mistakes creep in. Across thousands of cases, patterns repeat. Crucial evidence isn't bagged correctly, leads go unpursued, interviews aren't recorded, or officers lock onto one suspect early and ignore alternatives. Sometimes those errors are exposed at trial, other times they stay buried until an appeal or a podcast drags them into the light. If you care about true crime or how justice really works, this channel breaks down those patterns with a critical eye. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing and tapping the notification bell so you don't miss future breakdowns. And stay with me to the end of this video because we'll talk about what actually fixes these problems. Everything starts or falls apart at the crime scene. One of the most common ways police ruin cases is by mishandling that first chaotic hour. Imagine officers rushing in, dozens of people walking through a small house, no one clearly in charge of controlling access. Evidence gets moved to get a better look. Cigarette butts are picked up without gloves. Doors and windows are closed, destroying potential fingerprints or trace evidence. Later, defense attorneys don't have to prove the evidence was contaminated. They just need to show that it could have been. If the chain of custody is unclear, or if photos don't match written reports, judges may suppress crucial items. A bloody shoe print, a shell casing, even a weapon itself can be excluded. It doesn't have to be dramatic misconduct. Simple failures, no crime scene log, unswabbed blood, unlabeled evidence bags, are enough to create reasonable doubt. Once that doubt exists, the entire prosecution can unravel, no matter how confident investigators felt at the start. Next comes the paperwork. Reports, logs, and notes that seem boring but are absolutely critical. Sloppy documentation is a silent killer of cases. Officers may rely on memory instead of taking detailed notes. Times and locations get mixed up, interviews aren't summarized accurately, and small contradictions creep in. When a case reaches trial, every inconsistency is ammunition. A defense lawyer will ask, "Why does your report say you arrived at 10:15 but your body cam timestamps show 10:42? Or, you say the suspect seemed nervous. What does that mean? Did you write that down at the time or later?" If the officer's answers sound uncertain, a jury starts to question everything. Even honest mistakes undermine credibility. A missed detail in an evidence log can make it look like items were switched. A witness statement rewritten days later looks coached. Judges have dismissed entire charges because procedure wasn't followed on paper, even when everyone believes the officers acted in good faith at the scene. One of the most damaging but common errors is what's called tunnel vision. It happens when investigators lock onto a theory or a suspect so early that every new piece of information is forced to fit that story. Leads that don't match, are minimized or ignored. Picture a case where a victim's ex-partner seems like the obvious culprit. They had arguments, there are angry text messages, neighbors mention shouting. Police zero in on that person from day one. When anonymous tips point to someone else, those tips are labeled not credible. When forensic timelines don't quite match, they're explained away. Alternative suspects are never fully checked out. By the time the case reaches trial, the entire file is built around one narrative. Defense attorneys then uncover the ignored leads and show the jury a pattern. Every inconvenient fact was sidelined. Even if the original suspect is guilty, the appearance of bias can create enough doubt to tank the case, or to overturn a conviction years later on appeal. Interrogations are another minefield. When police get a confession, it feels like the ultimate victory, but how they got it is everything. Courts have thrown out confessions because officers questioned suspects for hours without breaks, implied they could go home if they just admitted something, or fed details about the crime that later appeared in the suspect's statement. The worst mistakes involve interrogating vulnerable people, juveniles, those with intellectual disabilities, or suspects who don't fully understand their rights. Without full recordings, it's almost impossible to reconstruct what really happened in that room. A typed confession can look clean, but a jury may never see that earlier denials were ignored or that key phrases were suggested by detectives. When a judge rules that a confession was coerced or involuntary, the impact is massive. Not only is that statement suppressed, but the entire case's credibility drops. Jurors start to ask, if they crossed the line in the interview room, where else did they cut corners? Lineups and eyewitness IDs feel powerful on TV. A victim points and says, "That's the one." In reality, police can easily, and sometimes unintentionally, poison this process. Common errors include showing the suspect's photo multiple times, making them stand out in a lineup, or giving subtle cues when a witness picks the right person. For example, if 5 lineup photos show clean-shaven men and one has a beard matching the attacker's description, the witness is nudged toward that choice. If an officer says, "Good, thanks, you helped a lot," after the selection, the witness's confidence skyrockets, even if they were unsure at first. Courts have thrown out identifications when procedures weren't double-blind or properly recorded. Defense attorneys love cross-examining sloppy lineups because once jurors realize how malleable memory is, that dramatic eyewitness moment loses its power. A case heavily dependent on one ID can crumble, not because the witness lied, but because police unintentionally steered the whole process. Forensics are supposed to be the most objective part of a case, but police and labs still make errors that ruin prosecutions. Sometimes it's contamination, DNA samples stored improperly, swabs packaged while still wet, or multiple items opened on the same table. Other times, it's overclaiming what the science can actually prove. Think about bite mark comparison, hair microscopy, or pattern matching on tool marks. These techniques have been aggressively criticized by scientists and courts, yet officers might testify, "We have a match," when the underlying method is far less certain. Years later, appeals courts look back and say, that evidence never should have been admitted. There's also the issue of cognitive bias. If forensic analysts know the police suspect someone, they may unconsciously lean toward conclusions that support that theory. When judges learn that the lab wasn't blinded, or that quality control was poor, they may exclude those results entirely. Once the scientific backbone of a case disappears, many prosecutions simply collapse. Sometimes the most damaging mistake isn't what police did, it's what they failed to share. Under the Brady rule, prosecutors must turn over exculpatory evidence, anything that might help the defense. That includes police notes about alternative suspects, deals with informants, or early statements that contradict later testimony. When officers don't document these things properly, or when they keep them tucked away in unofficial notebooks, they make Brady violations much more likely. If a judge later finds that key evidence was withheld, whether intentionally or by negligence, the entire conviction can be overturned. In some cases, charges are dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't be brought again. Even when a case doesn't fully collapse, the ripple effect is huge. Juries lose trust. Appeals drag on for years. Taxpayers foot the bill for retrials and civil settlements, all because someone decided that a piece of information was not important or didn't need to go in the report. In the justice system, hiding weaknesses almost always backfires. Body cameras were supposed to solve a lot of these problems until missing or incomplete footage started sinking cases. When a critical arrest or search isn't recorded, jurors immediately wonder why. Did the officer forget to turn the camera on, or did they choose not to hit record at a sensitive moment? Courts are increasingly skeptical when policies say cameras must be used, but key events somehow escape video. Defense attorneys can argue that the absence of footage should be held against the prosecution, especially when there's a pattern of gaps. Even when footage exists, sloppy handling can ruin its value. If videos are mislabeled, accidentally overwritten, or shared in heavily edited form, judges may question their reliability. Chain of custody rules apply to digital evidence too. Ironically, in some departments, officers now rely on body cams so much that they take fewer written notes, assuming the video will cover it. When that video is missing or corrupted, the hole in the case becomes enormous. External pressure is another way cases get quietly sabotaged. High-profile crimes bring political leaders, media, and communities demanding quick arrests. Under that spotlight, departments sometimes cut corners. They announce a suspect before the lab work is done, or hold a press conference that taints potential jurors. Leaked details can backfire too. If police feed specifics to reporters, like exactly how a victim was found, future confessions or witness statements become less reliable because people can mimic what they've heard on the news. Defense teams can then argue convincingly that the supposed inside knowledge wasn't so inside after all. Judges have tossed cases where pretrial publicity, often fueled by law enforcement comments, made it impossible to seat an impartial jury. Even when a mistrial doesn't happen, aggressive media strategies can weaken a prosecution months later in the courtroom. In trying to reassure the public that they're on top of it, police sometimes undermine the very case they're racing to solve. Not every mistake leads to an innocent person's conviction. Sometimes errors let clearly guilty defendants walk free. Courts suppress evidence gathered from illegal searches, no warrant, wrong address, or going beyond the scope allowed. If that evidence was central, the prosecution may have no case left. For example, entering a home on a flimsy excuse and finding drugs or a weapon can look great on paper until a judge hears the full story. If police can't justify the stop or the entry, the exclusionary rule kicks in. That means the jury never sees that item, no matter how incriminating it is. Poorly conducted photo arrays, inconsistent officer testimony, or destroyed notes can all give defense attorneys the leverage they need to dismantle otherwise strong cases. The public then sees headlines like "charges dropped on technicality," but those technicalities are constitutional rights, and ignoring them often means a dangerous person goes back onto the street. So what happens when police mistakes are uncovered? Sometimes not much: internal reviews, quiet policy tweaks, maybe a memo, but in serious cases, consequences can be huge. Overturned convictions, multi-million-dollar settlements, officers disciplined or even criminally charged. Appellate courts often use strong language when criticizing investigations, calling interrogations inherently coercive, or describing evidence handling as so deficient that the integrity of the verdict is compromised. Those phrases don't just affect one case, they shape how future judges view similar issues. Reform can come from these failures. Some departments adopted full-length interrogation recording only after a scandal. Others changed lineup procedures to be double-blind, or created independent units to review wrongful conviction claims, but reforms are uneven. In many places, the same known problems, tunnel vision, poor documentation, shaky forensics, keep repeating. Understanding how and why these errors happen is the first step to demanding better practices and to recognizing weak cases long before a verdict is read. Let's pull this together. Cases usually don't implode because of one dramatic mistake. They crumble under the weight of many small, preventable errors. At the crime scene, poor evidence handling plants seeds of doubt. Sloppy reports and missing notes crack credibility. Tunnel vision narrows the search, while flawed lineups and shaky interrogations distort what witnesses and suspects say. Questionable forensics and mishandled bodycam footage further erode trust. When exculpatory evidence isn't shared, Brady violations can undo years of work. Add media pressure and constitutional shortcuts, and even a seemingly airtight case can fall apart in court or on appeal. The takeaway isn't that all police are corrupt, it's that the system is fragile. Good procedures, transparency, and documentation matter as much as courage or intuition. When those safeguards fail, both the innocent and the public's safety are put at risk. Knowing these failure points helps you evaluate cases more critically beyond the headlines and press conferences. If you've stayed with me this far, you now see how fragile a criminal case really is, and how much depends on ordinary decisions made by officers, detectives, and labs in those first hours. The next time you see a sensational arrest on the news, you'll know to ask, how was the evidence collected? Was the confession recorded? Did they check other suspects? What might be missing from the story? On this channel, we break down investigations, trials, and wrongful convictions in this level of detail, looking past the headlines and into the actual mechanics of justice. If that's the kind of analysis you want more of, take a second now to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who binge watches true crime. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which mistake do you think is most dangerous? Tunnel vision, bad forensics, or coerced confessions? And what reforms would you prioritize first? I'll be reading and replying.